these answers not forthcoming, I started questioning the faith. And at that point, I'm like, look, there are just too many questions, too many question marks. I'm not getting answers, or I'm not getting satisfactory answers. And I just found my way out of Christianity. But I didn't go to Islam right away. I was initially drawn towards Judaism,
Mm.
and the Judaism was really more of the kinds of objections that I was getting interested in were things like this apparent contradiction between the New Testament and the Old Testament, the keeping of the laws
Mm.
versus abolishing them. And one of the things that was very instrumental here um, in the argumentation was not being able to see the continuity.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I was seeing the rabbinical Judaism, the way that Judaism is practiced nowadays by modern Jews, and whether it's like Orthodox or Hasidic Jews who are more traditional, either which way, it doesn't really matter. But nevertheless, my impression being that, oh, this was just kind of the way that Judaism was always practiced. This
Mm-hmm.
is the way Jews always thought throughout the millennia. The only difference is they just don't have a temple. So they're doing basically what they've always been doing, but just lacking a temple
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do the sacrificial aspect of it.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of drew me more towards Judaism, because just having that little bit of familiarity already with the Old Testament through my musings and trying to understand better the Christian position. But ironically, it was the Muslim objections to Christianity that was the trigger for me to question the faith. So I more or less stayed with what I was already familiar with, but using Islam, Islam's objections towards Christianity as the catalyst, if
Mm.
you will.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until engrossing myself within a Hasidic community that I started to see there's a lot of um, problems with the theology,
Mm.
with stuff that just was very abhorrent to me. It was a lot of spiritual racism, if you will. When you start reading um, things like the Tanya, you will start coming across notions how Jews have literally a godly soul, whereas non Jews do not. And so that there is this explicit segmentation between these types of humans versus these other types of humans, where one is superior to the other in quite a real sense. Whether it's spiritually, makes no difference between a physical difference. The spiritual aspect is a component to a person, and it cannot be divorced from the physical manifestation that you see before you. And so it was a lot of these things that went to justify the superiority of the Jewish soul above everybody else's, that I was finding quite problematic. Because in the Old Testament, when you read the Old Testament, the Jews were supposed to be a light unto the nations. Okay, whether or not they actively went and proselytized the nations, that's an altogether different story. But nevertheless, they are meant to be a light unto the nations, meaning that God's word extends to everybody. Everybody should come under the worship of the one God and not be motivated out of a sense of superiority. And so I saw the cracks with Judaism come through there, from the one aspect. And then the other aspect was this absolutely high, absurd degree of, what can I say? How can I phrase it? An adherence to man made traditions. And it is to such an extent. And I'll give an example here where I was living with a roommate. This is now kind of my early days within university. And I was with a roommate, and the custom that Jews are supposed to follow is you put the right shoe on first and then the left. And then when you take your shoes off, you take the left one off first and then the right.
Mhm.
And this fellow was about to leave home, and he stops at the door, and I look at him and, what's wrong? And he's like, oh, I put the left shoe on first. So he literally then took his shoes off to put them back on in the right order.
Oh gosh.
And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, are you joking me? Like, do you think you're going to get hellfire because you put the shoes on in the wrong order? But it just kind of was like this momentary realization, the degree of absurdity that people are doing in their religion, that was very Pharisaical, and Pharisaical in the proper sense of the word.
Yeah.
They're not looking at the spirit; they're really looking at the letter of the law in its most preciseness, in its most precisity. And it was that, coupled with this theological issues that I was seeing, that just kind of pushed me out the door toward out of Judaism. I just did not want to have any more part of it. I mean, I'm simplifying a lot, but I'm just
Mhm.
saying, like, this is over a year and a half of being in the community and learning these things, and just seeing this kind of a pattern exhibit itself repeatedly. It culminates into just a level of absurdity that this cannot be the true faith.
Mhm.
And that kind of segued right into Islam.
There is also many different prophecies about how the Messiah would be rejected, that he would be cut off. And this is exactly what we see happen with Jesus. And also the prophecies about the sacrifice. The Israelites sacrificed animals, the best lambs. They could remit sins that way. So why couldn't there be something more? If God assumed a human nature and died for the sins of humanity, if an animal can die for the sins of a human, the Messiah had to come during the Second Temple period. He had to be a king of the Davidic line. He had to ride on a donkey, just like Jesus did on Palm Sunday. How could the rabbinical Jews of today know that the Messiah actually was a descendant of David? We have very clear records that Jesus was a descendant of David. Is there any other messiahs before the destruction of the Second Temple that can claim this? And there's also some very unique prophecies about, even in Genesis, in that in Abraham's seed all the nations of the earth be blessed. How exactly could this happen, that a small ethno-religion would bless all the nations on the earth, unless Jesus is a Messiah? We see that Christianity has spread to almost every nation on the earth, and we can see its fulfillment in the New Testament. The Messiah would bring an everlasting kingdom. If you're thinking about this on the micro scale, you're thinking of an earthly kingdom that's going to last forever, but we know that every earthly kingdom ends. And this is what Jesus preached, that he is going to have a kingdom that is not of this world, that lasts forever. We did not know that it would be fulfilled in this way, but we can see now. The Psalms are full of messianic prophecies predicting the resurrection, that the Messiah would be a mediator between man and God, that he will be his father and he will be his son, that he will have the title of king, that he will be declared the beloved son, the horn of salvation, the darkness upon Calvary for 3 hours. All of these were predicted in the Psalms. Very specific details about the life of Jesus would be predicted from the very beginning in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Isaiah is also full of messianic prophecies. Many of these stick out to me, that his ministry would begin in Galilee, that he'd be born a child of humanity, a son that is given deity because he is the God-man, fully God, fully man. And the Gentiles would seek him. How do you make sense of this if Judaism was always meant to be just an ethno-religion and not called to bless all the nations that we read about in Genesis? That's who the Messiah should be. He should have came before the destruction of the Second Temple. And we have two options. Is it rabbinical Judaism, or are we in the Messianic age, which would be Orthodox Christianity? Some modern day rabbinical Jews will say, oh, the Messiah wasn't supposed to be a man. Well, actually, that's not Orthodox Judaism. The Orthodox rabbinical Jews are still waiting for the Messiah in a man because of all the messianic prophecies. It's a very new and modern reform thing to say, oh, the Messiah is not going to be a man, or he's just going to bring worldly peace. So the modern day Judaism that we see, rabbinic Judaism, again, it has its roots in the Pharisaic school of the Second Temple period, a certain faction that won out and became the mainstream Judaism since the 6th century, after they codified the Babylonian Talmud. Since the times of the apostle and early church history to now, rabbinic Judaism and and the Christian church have diverged more and more. And the Talmud is actually very polemical against Jesus and the competing religion, Christianity. We can read about this in the book Jesus and the Talmud.